Good morning and happy Sabbath. I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be preaching to the congregation that I grew up attending church with, but I'm very honored and I'm very glad that I've been given this opportunity. And it's actually not my first time up on stage, not in Anthem, but in the other service, I was part of the handbell choir for about 10 years at this church. And we have this tradition at the end of every year that we go to a different amusement park. And even though I had been at college for 2 years previously, my younger siblings are in the handball choir, so I was invited to go along with them to Six Flags Magic Mountain this past summer, because that is where we decided as a group that we wanted to go. And I have to preface this by saying that I have the reputation in my family of not being the most street smart person. In fact, if you asked my parents, or if you asked like my really close friends, they would tell you that I'm probably like the least street smart person they've ever met. But I can navigate, and I truly believe that I could get us to Six Flags Magic Mountain. And my parents had always referred to it as just Magic Mountain, so I confidently typed that into Google Maps, and I was getting ready to go, and my brother, he looks over at me knowing that I struggle with navigation, and he's like, Nicole, are you sure you can get us there? I'm like, King, don't worry, I got you. Like, I typed in Magic Mountain, Google Maps, like, this is a normal ETA, like, we're gonna be fine. And he's like, okay, I guess, okay. So off we went, and at first everything was fine. We were on the 4-lane freeway, traffic was flowing, and then Google told me to get off the 4-lane freeway and move on to this 2-lane highway. And I was like, that's a little odd, but I mean, maybe there's traffic, maybe it's just rerouting us. And I was gonna ask my brother to like confirm with him, but he was sleeping, of course. So I'm like, okay, it's fine, I got this. And I really thought I got this until that 2-lane highway turned into a 1-lane road. And I was like, like this is not looking too good. But I mean, I'm following Google Maps. I haven't taken any wrong turns. I think we're gonna be fine. And I really thought we were gonna be fine until that 1-lane road suddenly crossed some railroad tracks. And suddenly I found myself at the base of this gravel road with a bunch of trailers that were all abandoned and this huge no trespassing sign. And I'm starting to pick up on the fact that like, something isn't right, when my brother wakes up and he's like, Nicole, where are we? Turns out in Southern California, there is a real physical mountain called Magic Mountain. And there's nothing magical about it, I can tell you that. There's nothing. So while the rest of our group was going to Six Flags Magic Mountain, I had just typed in Magic Mountain and ended up here. And really the only commandment I got from leaving that mountain was from my brother, who told me, thou shalt not ever navigate again while I'm in the vehicle because I don't trust you. And I tell you this story because it's funny and it makes me laugh, but while I was studying the story of the man at the Pool of Bethesda, I noticed that there were a lot of parallels. I was following the only directions I knew. I was following it to a T, and I was doing my best, but I still did not get to my intended destination. And that's exactly where we meet the man in John chapter 5. He's following the only instructions he knows. He's waiting by the pool, watching the waters, seeing when they're going to stir, and yet he has never reached his destination of healing. The scene John sets for us in chapter 5 of his gospel is not a pretty one. In verse 2, it says, Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. Can you imagine the amount of suffering and hurting that was congregated in that one area? For 38 years, the man had waited there. Last week, Dr. Hart shared a message on who Jesus would heal if he came onto this earth today. And this morning, I want to share with you guys how Jesus heals. Because the truth is that even though the setting might look different, the needs and the suffering that was present at the Pool of Bethesda are still found in our world today. And by studying Jesus' example on how he healed people during his ministry here on earth, we can better equip ourselves to go forward and act as his hands and feet in our hurting world. The first thing that really stood out to me while I was studying this story was presence, and more particularly, Jesus' presence. In Desire of Ages, on page 201, Ellen G. White writes this. She says, "But the Savior saw one case of supreme wretchedness. It was that of a man who had been a helpless cripple for 38 years. His disease was in great degree the result of his own sin, and was looked upon as judgment from God. Alone and friendless, feeling that he was shut out from God's mercy, the sufferer had passed long years of misery. 38 years of waiting there by himself, all alone. And yet Jesus stopped for him. Jesus decided to step into a place where no one else wanted to go. Jesus singled out the man who had been there for 38 years. And Jesus walked into that man's story and rewrote it completely. The thing that I took away from this is that Jesus did not try to avoid the suffering. Rather, he decided to walk right into it. And as his followers, we are called to do the same thing. We are called to enter into people's pain and not just pass them by. We are called to see them not as patients or as projects, but as people who are deeply loved by God and who are his children. Because the truth is, when we decide to walk into those places in our world today that are filled with suffering and filled with hurting, that is when the love of Jesus becomes a reality to the people who are there. And the people who are there are the ones who need to feel it the most. While Jesus was here on earth, he made sure that his presence was felt by everyone in society, not just the ones that society valued. Jesus was the one who went and interacted with the lepers. Jesus is the one who went and interacted with the Samaritans, with the women. Jesus did not just interact with the Pharisees or people who were higher up in class in society, but he made sure that his presence was felt by every individual. So that's the first thing that I noticed about Jesus' healing ministry. The second thing I noticed is how Jesus always healed with wholeness. At Loma Linda University, we are no strangers to the term "to make man whole." But what does that really mean, and how did Jesus show it in his ministry? In Matthew's Gospel, in chapter 4, verse 23, he says this: "Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people." Notice how intentional that is. Jesus taught, he preached to them, and he healed them. He didn't just meet their immediate needs, their immediate physical needs. Rather, he made sure to treat the whole person. As Adventists, we are blessed to have an incredible healthcare message that also focuses on treating the whole person. Some of you guys may know my dad that Pastor Chris mentioned, Dr. Roger Sehuelt, and one thing that he is super passionate about is sharing this Adventist health message with others, particularly people who haven't heard it before. There's an acronym that kind of puts all of the Adventist health message into a nutshell that's really easy to remember, and the acronym is called New Start. And this is what each letter in the acronym stands for. The N stands for nutrition. This is pretty self-explanatory, eating whole plant-based foods that can help nourish our body. E stands for exercise, making sure that we move our body to strengthen it and just improve our overall health. W stands for water. This can include water both internally as well as water externally. S stands for sunlight. For those of you guys who know my dad, you know he's extremely passionate about this one. And in short, I will say that sunlight has a plethora of benefits that are both physical and mental. T is for temperance, making sure that we practice moderation. A is for air. R is for rest. This includes both a nightly rest as well as a weekly rest, which we call the Sabbath. And lastly, T is for trust in God, making sure that we rely on him for guidance, peace, and ultimate well-being. Jesus did not have this acronym New Start while he was here during his ministry on earth, but he still incorporated it into his own healing ministry. He taught, he preached, and he healed, and he made sure that when he interacted with someone, he cared for their whole person. And with this Adventist health message that we have, it's our duty to make sure we do the same, to not only care for our whole person, but whoever we interact with, whoever we heal, to make sure that we are caring for their whole person as well. And so the first two things I noticed were presence and wholeness. The third thing I noticed about Jesus' ministry is that he always finished with instruction. With the man at the pool, he first did initially heal the man and restore power to his legs, but in verse 14, he later then said, "Go and sin no more." This is not something that just happened once throughout his ministry. If you think of another example, which is the woman who was caught in the act of adultery, Jesus first saved her from death, but then he also told her, "Go and sin no more." Jesus always paired healing with instruction. He made sure that he didn't just heal the physical needs, but that he guided that person to a closer walk in Christ. And that is what is so important that we make sure we do to everyone we interact with. In her book, Ministry of Healing, on page 147, Ellen G. White says that every gospel worker should feel that giving instruction in the principles of healthful living is part of his appointed work. In other words, the health ministry is evangelism. It is our duty to tell others about Christ, to instruct them in the ways that they should go, to not only heal their physical needs or their mental needs, but also to focus on their spiritual needs. And Ellen G. White argues that this is the most important thing to do. One of the reasons that I'm particularly interested in how Jesus healed during his ministry here is because I myself am interested in pursuing a career in healthcare, particularly as a physician. And I have currently been a student at Southern for the past 2 years and just started my third year. And one of the opportunities that I had last semester was being a volunteer in the pediatric intensive care unit. And I learned a lot by being in that position, but there was one case that really stuck with me. And that was the day that I had a shift where there was a 7-year-old boy who was actively dying of cancer. And I was asked as a volunteer to make sure to silence the alarms on his monitor that were going off. And for those of you who don't understand this, because his saturations were dropping so low and dropping into a range that would normally trigger alarms to notify the healthcare personnel, basically his alarms were just going off constantly nonstop. And it was creating an environment that was really stressful for not only the medical personnel, but also the other patients and the family that was in the room. So I was asked just to make sure that the alarms stayed off, just to create a more peaceful environment. And so I sat there in front of the monitor for about the next 1.5 to 2 hours, and I watched as this little boy slowly passed away. I watched as his blood pressure dropped. I watched as his breathing became more shallow. And then I watched as his heart beat for the last time and he flatlined. And watching and going and experiencing that broke a part of me that I previously didn't even know existed. I had never in my life experienced death before, and I had never experienced death in that proximity as well as in that environment. And I remember on the way home, I called my parents and I told them, I was like, I don't know if I can go into healthcare as my career, because this one patient has impacted me so deeply. I don't think I can handle it to be in this type of environment for the next 30, 40 years. I don't think I'm strong enough to do this. And my parents were extremely supportive, and they were like, Nicole, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think you should close the door to ministry or to healthcare just yet, because you, first of all, have already dedicated 2 years of your life towards studying to enter medical school. And also, I don't think one particular situation should close that door 100%. I think you should still give it another try. And I said, okay, I see your point, so I'll keep an open mind. And I decided to go ahead and maybe switch departments and look at a different department. I decided to shadow a physician in the children's emergency room instead. And I was paired with this amazing chief resident. She was extremely knowledgeable about different types of medical terminology. She was super kind to me. She answered all my questions and explained things to me. But the thing that struck me the most about her was not her medical technique. It was the way that she cared. We would go around and visit different patients, and there was one patient that was this really small baby that was having trouble breathing and needed to be intubated. And the mother was extremely distraught and really, really scared. And I watched as the resident walked into that room and knelt on the floor next to the mother, took her hands in her own, and reassured her and explained to her what was going on, took the time to answer her questions. She didn't just heal, but I watched as the resident comforted. She didn't just treat, but she also served. And it was in that moment that I realized I was seeing Jesus in her. I saw a glimpse in her of what it means to be the hands and feet of Christ in this world. And that's when it hit me that I wanted my life to be about that too. I realized that medicine was not simply fixing bodies, but it was pointing people to the healer. It wasn't just helping people live, but it was also helping them see Jesus in the way that I live. It is no secret that our world is full of hurting and suffering people. And for some of us today, it can be really difficult to even fathom the idea of walking out and acting as Christ in this world because we ourselves are so broken and we ourselves need to be healed by Christ. And the truth is, by looking at Jesus in this story, it really only paints half the picture. Because there's another man, the crippled man, who was there all alone, unable to stand by himself for 38 years. And I can't help but ask, how many of us today are that way spiritually? How many of us have been spiritually paralyzed for the past 10, 20, or even 38 years? How many of us have been unable to stand on our own? How many of us have been unable to walk with Christ? The truth is, in this story, many of us aren't Christ. We are that crippled man. But the good news is that Jesus is still walking by. One of my mom's favorite sayings to my siblings and I is that the first step to fixing a problem is acknowledging that it exists. And that's exactly where the story hits home. Paul tells us in Ephesians 2 verse 1 that because of sin, we are spiritually paralyzed. There is literally nothing we can do on our own to fix this. We have to come to Christ. There's nothing we can do to be able to walk with Christ. We're just like that man at the pool. Maybe we have tried to fix it ourselves. Maybe we have tried to make devotions and things like that. But in the end, nothing has come to fruition. We are still spiritually paralyzed. But I have good news for you. Because the first step to fixing this is simply just acknowledging that we are helpless. It is simply just realizing that we cannot do anything on our own. And the next step is just waiting and allowing Christ to approach us. The man at the pool didn't try to crawl to Christ. He didn't try to prove himself worthy of receiving his healing. He simply sat there and waited. And he allowed Christ to come to him. And that is the beauty of the gospel, because Christ will come to us exactly where we are. Once Jesus approached the man, in verse 6, he asks him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Notice how the man is so focused on the actions he needs to take to be healed. He is so hyper-focused and explained to Christ, I can't get into the water. People are getting ahead of me. I can't get healed. The irony is that the true source of living water is standing right in front of this man, and yet his eyes are focused on the pool. How many of us have our eyes focused on something else that is getting in the way when our eyes should really be focused on Christ? Continuing in verse 8, then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. This man's healing did not begin the moment that he felt the power return to his legs. This man's healing began the moment he decided to obey the words of Christ and to follow in him and follow what Jesus said to him. The words that said, "Let there be light," 6,000 years ago, and there was light, told this man to pick up his mat and walk. And he was willing to obey, and he put his faith in those words. The truth is that we need to put our faith in the words of Christ because the words of Christ have power. Faith is so integral to the Christian experience. There is a man by the name of A.T. Jones who wrote an entire book on faith called Lessons on Faith. And in it, he gives us this definition. He says, faith is the expectation of the word of God itself to do what the word says, and depending upon that word itself to do what the word says. In other words, faith is putting our complete trust in God's book, in the Bible, is putting our complete trust in that what he says in here will come true. That's exactly what the man at the pool did. He put his complete trust into Christ's words when he said, get up and walk, and the man got up and walked away. In fact, faith is such an integral part to our Christian experience that God wanted to make sure we would know this. God made sure in his divinely inspired word that all of the stories on faith aren't scattered throughout the Bible. Rather, he made sure that they were all congregated in one book and in one chapter. And as Christians today, we call that chapter Hebrews chapter 11. All the stories of faith are in there. And all those stories of faith teach us that we need to put our faith into Christ. We need to put our faith in Jesus when he invites us to walk with him into newness of better life. The main takeaway that I want you to take from my sermon today is this. John chapter 5 gives us two calls. The first call is to go as Christ into our hurting world. It is to light up those places of darkness with our presence. It is to not only heal the physical and mental needs, but to treat the whole person and focus on their spiritual needs. And it's also to not only heal people, but to leave them with instruction that will point them in the way to Christ. The second call from John chapter 5 is to come as the crippled to Christ. It is to first admit that we are helpless. It is then to sit there and wait and allow Christ to approach us. And once he does that, it is to put our complete faith in him so that he can heal our spiritual paralysis. So for those of us today who are already serving, keep going. There are people out there who are hurting and suffering and need to feel the presence of Jesus' love in their life. And for those of us today who are spiritually paralyzed, whether that be from fear or from doubt or from sin, Jesus walks over to you and he bends down just like he bent down to the man at the Pool of Bethesda, and he asks with love and compassion and an outstretched hand, will you be made whole?